My attorney's office called me at 12:30 on a Wednesday in September, and the paralegal I'd worked with for nearly a decade said something that made me set down my turkey club sandwich and just stare at the wall of the diner booth. "Sir, I need to ask you something, and I'm going to need you to answer me carefully. Are you currently sitting in our conference room right now?" I wasn't. I was 3 miles away, in the back corner of a lunch spot I'd been going to since the 90s, a place where they still put the pickle on the side without being asked. "No," I said slowly. "Why would I be?" Her voice dropped the way people's voices drop when they're trying to stay professional but they're actually scared. "Because there's a man in our conference room right now claiming to be you, Sherman. He has your driver's license, your social security card, and a notarized power of attorney form. And your wife is with him. They're trying to sign the deed to your property over to a third-party LLC. I stalled them as long as I could, but they just walked out. You need to come here right away." My wife, I told her, had driven to Tennessee that morning to visit her sister. "Then please come now," she said. "Follow this story all the way to the end. And if it reaches you wherever you're watching from, drop your city in the comments. I want to know how far this has traveled. My name is Sherman. I'm 57 years old. I spent 31 years as a claims investigator for a regional insurance company. Not glamorous work, not the kind of career that gets told at dinner parties, but I was good at it. I knew how to read documents. I knew how to spot the small thing that didn't belong. I knew how to sit across from someone who was lying and wait them out with my face perfectly neutral until they said the thing they hadn't meant to say. I retired 4 years ago. I had a pension, a paid-off house on the northeast side of Atlanta, and the kind of quiet I'd earned. I'd also remarried. Second marriage, 2 years after my first wife passed from cancer when I was 52. Her name was Paula. She was 41 when we met at a church fundraiser, easy to talk to, the kind of woman who remembered the small details about people she'd just met and made them feel like the most important person in the room. My son thought she was wonderful. My daughter had reservations she'd mentioned once, about 6 months into the relationship, over the phone. Something about Paula felt just slightly too assembled, too calibrated, like every version of herself she showed you had been previewed first. I told my daughter she was still grieving and not ready to see me move on. That's the part I'll carry the longest. The drive to my attorney's office was 11 minutes. I know because I watched the clock the entire way. Paula had been making the trip to Knoxville roughly twice a month for the past year and a half, ever since her sister was diagnosed with a degenerative hip condition that made it hard for her to get around independently. The medical expenses were adding up, Paula said, and her sister was too proud to ask for help but too sick to manage alone. We'd been sending $3,000 a month to cover what the insurance didn't reach. I hadn't pushed back on that. Paula handled the logistics, the invoices, the billing contacts, all of it, and I trusted her to manage what she said she understood better than I did. As I turned into the parking lot of Hargrove & Associates, I thought about the fact that I had never once spoken directly with Paula's sister on the phone. Too tired, too medicated, too embarrassed to talk to people she didn't know well. Paula had always said it for her, and I had always accepted it, because I trusted my wife. Maureen met me at the front door. She was a woman in her early 60s, silver-haired and methodical, and she had the look of someone who had just done something difficult and wasn't certain it had been enough. "They left about 20 minutes ago," she said. "When I told them I needed to run a secondary authorization check and that it might take 30 to 40 minutes, the woman started pushing back. The man stayed very still. That's actually what worried me more. When a person should be impatient and they're not, there's usually a reason." She led me into the conference room and spread a set of documents across the table. The property deed transfer was made out in my name with what looked remarkably like my signature, authorizing the transfer of my home and the adjacent half-acre lot to an LLC registered in Delaware. The power of attorney form was attached, notarized cleanly. I stared at my own signature the way you stare at your reflection in an unfamiliar mirror, close enough to recognize, wrong in a way you can feel before you can name it. "What caught your attention first?" I asked. Maureen was quiet for a moment. "His hands," she said finally. He was holding very still, but his knuckles were working just slightly. People do that when they're concentrating hard on not doing something. In 30 years, I've learned that a nervous person trying to look calm is more alarming than an openly nervous person. An openly nervous person has nothing to hide. She produced a photocopy of the ID the man had presented. My name, my date of birth, my address. The photograph was close enough that I understood immediately how it had gotten this far in a professional setting with enough paperwork to manage the focus of the room. But it wasn't me. The nose was marginally wider, the jaw a bit heavier, the eyes set in a way I recognized the way you recognize a painting of someone you love, familiar but never quite right. "There's something else," Maureen said. She opened a second folder. 6 weeks ago, we received a call from someone claiming to be you, asking about procedures for transferring residential property to a family trust. The caller knew your client number, your account security phrase, and the name of the city where you opened your first account with us. I flagged it, but we didn't have grounds to escalate. I should have pushed harder. My house. 14 years of mortgage payments, 3 years of owning it free and clear, the single largest asset between me and an uncertain future. It had been the target of a process that had apparently been running for at least 6 weeks, and probably far longer than that. Paula's car was in the driveway when I got home. She wasn't supposed to be back for 2 more days. I sat in my car for a moment before going in. The old professional reflex, the one that said you don't confront a subject until you know what you're dealing with, was already running. You observe first. You collect what you can. You don't show your hand until you understand what they're holding. I went inside calmly, called out that I was home, heard her in the kitchen, heard the refrigerator, heard her voice carry through the house with that particular ease it always had. "I thought you had your lunch thing today," she said. "Finished early. How's your sister?" A pause, brief. I'd been listening for it. Tired. The new medication is making her groggy. I figured she needed rest more than she needed company. I sat at the kitchen table. Paula came in with 2 glasses of sweet tea and set one in front of me, and I looked at her the way I hadn't let myself look at her in 4 years. Not with love, but with the appraiser's eye I used to bring to work. The one that didn't assume. The one that only counted what it could verify. "What's her doctor's name again?" I asked. I was thinking about calling to ask about the billing, see if there are payment options we're not using. Paula sat down across from me, positioning herself at the precise distance that a trained person uses when they want to seem relaxed without being within easy reading range. "Oh, honey, I handle all of that. You know how insurance billing is. They won't talk to anyone but the primary account holder." "Sure," I said. "Just the doctor's name, though." "Lawson," she said, without a pause, without searching for it. A real answer would have come with hesitation, not because she'd be lying, but because most people don't have their family member's physician's name at the front of their mind on a random Wednesday afternoon. Paula had it ready. She'd prepared it. "I got a call from Maureen today," I said, "from the attorney's office." The glass in her hand settled against the table a half-second too slowly. "Someone tried to sign over the deed to the house this morning. Power of attorney form, man presenting as me, the whole thing." I kept my voice exactly the way I used to keep it in the field. Conversational, unhurried, revealing nothing. "You wouldn't know anything about that." She didn't flinch. She held very still, the kind of stillness that isn't natural but has been practiced until it resembles calm, and then she said the precise thing that told me everything. "My God, Sherman, someone must have stolen your identity. We need to call the police right now." She said it in exactly the right tone, worried, urgent, already pivoting toward solutions. But someone who has just been told that a stranger nearly stole their spouse's home asks questions. How? When? Did it go through? Are we okay? Are we going to lose the house? Paula asked me nothing. She moved immediately to the answer, bypassing all the questions an innocent person would need answered first. I told her I needed to check something in the office and I'd be right back. I waited until I heard the television turn on, before I went to the filing cabinet in the corner. Paula had installed the combination lock on it about 18 months ago, after she said she'd read an article about identity theft. She'd chosen the combination herself. What she hadn't known was that I'd watched her set it, and I'd written the sequence in the small leather notebook I'd kept in my center desk drawer since 1993. The combination still worked. The first folder, labeled in Paula's neat handwriting, Brenda, Medical, contained 22 months of invoices from what was supposed to be a physical therapy practice in Knoxville. The letterhead looked persuasive at a glance, but I had spent 3 decades reviewing medical billing for fraudulent claims. The tell was small. The National Provider Identifier number in the upper right corner of each form was identical across all 22 months and all service types. Real providers get distinct NPI assignments for different specialties and billing categories. A single static NPI across 2 years of varied treatment types is the kind of detail that a forger gets wrong because they don't know what it means. These documents had never been issued by a real clinic. The second folder was worse. It contained a preliminary deed transfer form identical to the one Maureen had shown me, a home equity line of credit application in my name for $210,000 against the property, and at the back, folded once, a beneficiary change form for my term life insurance policy. $250,000, previously designated to my children, apparently submitted to the insurer 8 months ago and reassigned to Paula. I had never signed that form. I'd never seen it before that moment. At the very back of the folder was a handwritten page in Paula's careful cursive. It was titled Pays 3. It listed dates. Property transfer target window October. HELOC disbursement 2 to 3 weeks following. Relocation coordinate with D. And at the bottom, in handwriting that was heavier and more angular than hers. If subject becomes suspicious before completion, cabin option remains available. Lake accident. Clean. D handles on site. P establishes alibi in Nashville. D. I had met Paula's cousin Damon exactly twice. A quiet man in his mid-40s, unremarkably handsome, who Paula said worked somewhere in real estate in the Carolinas and didn't make it to Atlanta often. He'd been pleasant at both dinners, asked sensible questions, shook hands with exactly the right amount of pressure, firm enough to seem genuine, relaxed enough to seem harmless. He was the man in the photograph from the attorney's office. And someone was writing about staging an accident at a lake. I have a brother-in-law who owns a cabin on a reservoir 2 hours north of the city. I have gone there every October for 12 years to fish with my son. It is not a secret. Paula had heard me talk about that trip every fall of our marriage. She knew what I did there. She knew I went alone with my son and no cell signal for 3 days. She had known it for 4 years. I called 911. I called Maureen and asked her to preserve everything and pull all the building security footage from that morning. Then I sat at my desk and waited, and when Detective Briggs arrived, I handed him the documents in a clean stack and explained the situation the way I used to present fraudulent claims to review committees, in order, clearly, with the logic self-evident in the arrangement. Briggs was younger than I expected, but he listened like a man who was keeping score carefully, and he never interrupted once. When he'd finished reading the handwritten page, he looked up at me. "Do you have a cabin?" "My brother-in-law's. My son and I fish there every October." "Does your wife know that?" "She knows everything about my schedule," I said. "She's known it for 4 years. The FBI field office got involved that afternoon. What looked like a local property fraud case connected. Through the Delaware LLC, through the forged notary credentials, through a storage unit Damon had rented in Charlotte under a false identity, to prior operations in 2 other states. In one of those cases, a man in his late 50s had died in a boating accident on a lake in western Tennessee, 14 months after his wife had initiated a property transfer under similar circumstances. The manner of death was listed as accidental drowning. The case had never been reopened. Agent Fisk, who ran my case out of the Atlanta field office, told me that Paula had been married at least 3 times before, under different legal names in different states. She had a particular talent for finding men who were recently widowed, financially solvent, and without strong family networks nearby. She had a talent for making those men feel found. She had also, Fisk told me, never once been arrested. Every previous operation had either completed cleanly before anyone noticed or ended in a way that left no one to correct the record. They wanted me to serve as bait. I told them yes. For 8 days I went back to my ordinary life. I went to the hardware store and the diner and the grocery. Paula came and went as she always had. We ate dinner together 4 times. She asked me thoughtful questions about my day and laughed at the same things and reached across the table once to squeeze my hand and tell me she was glad we'd found each other, and I squeezed back and said me too. That was the hardest 8 days of my life, and I've had some genuinely hard ones. Because at least in those other hard moments, I knew what kind of pain I was in the middle of. On the 6th evening, a gray Dodge I didn't recognize parked at the far end of the street, with the engine running for 40 minutes. I pressed the small button on the side of the device Fisk had given me. On the 9th day, Paula asked whether I'd thought any more about skipping the October fishing trip because of my knee. "I'm thinking I might," I said. "Maybe we take a long weekend somewhere instead, just the 2 of us, somewhere quiet." She said that sounded wonderful. A light came into her eyes that was different from any light I'd seen there before. I understood then what I had looked like to her from the beginning. 2 nights later, I was in the living room when I heard the back door. The breaker tripped and the house went dark. I dropped below the level of the couch. I pressed the button 3 times. Paula's voice came from the hallway, quiet, almost gentle. "Sherman, honey, let's not make this complicated." Damon came from the direction of the kitchen, closer than I'd expected. "Don't do anything that causes problems for everyone, Sherman. Just stand up." I stayed on the floor. My heart rate was high, but my thinking was clear, the way it used to get clear in difficult field interviews when the facts were all wrong, and I had to stay very still to figure out where I actually was. "You don't have to do this," I said. Paula stepped into the room. Her silhouette in the faint light from the windows was familiar in a way that didn't help me. "We've come too far," she said. She sounded tired in a way I'd never heard from her before. "Genuine, maybe. The first genuine thing in years. Too much time. Too much planning. You understand that." "I understand that at least one person didn't walk away from a lake trip," I said. "I understand that much." The silence that followed was its own kind of confession. Damon said, "Get up. We're going to take a drive." The front door came off its hinges. Federal agents are deliberate when they clear a room. The lights came back. The breaker interruption had lasted less than a minute, long enough to disorient, not long enough to matter. There were voices from every entry point, the particular precision of people who've rehearsed the sequence until the steps are automatic. I stayed down until Fisk said my name and put her hand on my shoulder. Damon was on the floor near the kitchen, wrists bound behind him. Paula was against the far wall, and even then, even at that moment, her expression was calculating, still working through something. Still to the last looking for the angle. The last thing she said before they walked her out was directed at me. I did care about you, she said. I want you to know that. I didn't answer. There wasn't anything true to say that would have landed in the right direction. Paula is serving 18 years in a federal correctional facility. Damon received life without parole after investigators linked him to the Tennessee drowning and a second suspicious death in Ohio 2 years before that. The Delaware LLC was dissolved. The fraudulent beneficiary designation on my life insurance policy was reversed. The deed to my house is exactly where it was 14 years ago, recorded in my name at the county recorder's office, right where it belongs. My daughter stayed with me for 3 weeks afterward. She didn't say I told you so, which tells you everything you need to know about her. My son called every single day for the first month. They handled it better than I did. In those early weeks when I kept finding things Paula had chosen, a set of dish towels, a painting in the hallway, a throw pillow in a color I'd never liked but hadn't mentioned, and not knowing what to do with them. I sold the house about 6 months after the trial concluded. I bought a smaller place across the city in a neighborhood Paula had never visited, a house where every object is something I chose. It's quieter than I expected, not unpleasantly so. I still think about the man who drowned in Tennessee, whether anyone at home waited for him to walk through the door, whether his family ever found out what really happened, or whether they were left with the version that was designed to be believed. The truth matters. I've thought that my whole working life, but I think it differently now. Maureen noticed something wrong about a man's hands in a conference room on a Wednesday afternoon and trusted that instinct enough to make a phone call before she processed a document that would have taken everything I had. She saved my life as surely as anyone with a weapon or a badge. I survived because I'd spent 30 years learning that the document that looks perfect is sometimes the one that isn't. Because my daughter said something I filed away without knowing I was doing it. Because when they asked me to go back to my routine and hold still and let it come to me, I did. And because when I finally had to choose between running and staying, I stayed. That's the only part of this I've never questioned.